If you see the president, tell him for me that whatever happens there will be no turning back. In every battle there comes a time when both sides consider themselves beaten, then he who continues the attack wins. The friend in my adversity I shall always cherish most. I can better trust those who help to relieve the gloom of my dark hours than those who are so ready to enjoy with me the sunshine of my prosperity. Labor disgraces no man. Unfortunately, you occasionally find men who disgrace labor. There are many men who would have done better than I did under the circumstances in which I found myself. If I had never held command, if I had fallen, there were 10,000 behind who would have followed the contest to the end and never surrendered the Union. If we are to have another contest in the near future of our national existence, I predict that the dividing line will not be Mason and Dixon's but between patriotism and intelligence on the one side, and superstition, ambition and ignorance on the other. Although a soldier by profession, I have never felt any sort of fondness for war, and I have never advocated it, except as a means of peace. The art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is. Get at him as soon as you can. Strike him as hard as you can, and keep moving on. If men make war in slavish obedience to rules, they will fail. But for a soldier his duty is plain. He is to obey the orders of all those placed over him and whip the enemy wherever he meets him. I have never advocated war except as a means of peace. The great bulk of the legal voters of the South were men who owned no slaves, their homes were generally in the hills and poor country, their facilities for educating their children, even up to the point of reading and writing, were very limited, their interest in the contest was very meager. What there was, if they had been capable of seeing it, was with the North. They too needed emancipation. Wherever the enemy goes, let our troops go also. In 1850, I believe, the church property in the United States, which paid no tax, amounted to $87 million. In 1900, without a check, it is safe to say, this property will reach a sum exceeding $3 billion. I would suggest the taxation of all property equally. The right of revolution is an inherent one. When people are oppressed by their government, it is a natural right they enjoy to relieve themselves of oppression, if they are strong enough, whether by withdrawal from it, or by overthrowing it and substituting a government more acceptable. The will of the people is the best law. God gave us Lincoln and liberty, let us fight for both. Let us labor for the security of free thought, free speech, pure morals, unfettered religious sentiments, and equal rights and privileges for all men, irrespective of nationality, color, or religion. Leave the matter of religious teaching to the family altar, the church, and the private school, supported entirely by private contribution. Keep church and state forever separate. I felt like anything rather than rejoicing at the downfall of a foe who had fought so long and valiantly, and had suffered so much for a cause, though that cause was, I believe, one of the worst for which a people ever fought, and one for which there was the least excuse. Generally the officers of the army were indifferent whether the annexation of Texas was consummated or not, but not so all of them. For myself, I was bitterly opposed to the measure, and to this day regard the war, which resulted, as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. It was an instance of a republic following the bad example of European monarchies, in not considering justice in their desire to acquire additional territory. Our great modern republic. May those who seek the blessings of its institutions and the protection of its flag remember the obligations they impose. My failures have been errors in judgment, not of intent. I only knew what was in my mind, and I wished to express it clearly. There never was a time when, in my opinion, some way could not be found to prevent the drawing of the sword. I know no method to secure the repeal of bad or obnoxious laws so effective as their stringent execution. I desire the goodwill of all, whether hitherto my friends or not. No theory of my own will ever stand in the way of my executing, in good faith, any order I may receive from those in authority over me. The theory of government changes with general progress. Encourage free schools and resolve that not $1 appropriated for their support shall be appropriated to the support of any sectarian schools. Resolve that neither the state nor nation, nor both combined, shall support institutions of learning other than those sufficient to afford every child growing up in the land of opportunity of a good common school education, unmixed with sectarian, pagan, or atheistical dogmas. Leave the matter of religion to the family altar, the church and the private school supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separate. There was always news coming back to the quarter about someone who had been killed or sent to prison for killing someone else. Snowball, stabbed to death at a nightclub in Port Allen. Claudie, killed by a woman in New Orleans. Smitty, sent to the state penitentiary at Angola for manslaughter. And there were others who did not go anywhere but simply died slower. No other terms than unconditional and immediate surrender. I propose to move immediately upon your works. I appreciate the fact, and am proud of it, that the attentions I am receiving are intended more for our country than for me personally. I have nothing to do with opinions. I deal only with armed rebellion and its aiders and abettors. I would suggest the taxation of all property equally, whether church or corporation, exempting only the last resting place of the dead and possibly, with proper restrictions, church edifices. There never was a time when, in my opinion, some way could not be found to prevent the drawing of the sword. I know no method to secure the repeal of bad or obnoxious laws so effective as their stringent execution. Hold fast to the Bible. To the influence of this book we are indebted for all the progress made in true civilization, and to this we must look as our guide in the future. It was my fortune, or misfortune, to be called to the office of chief executive without any previous political training. I have made it a rule of my life to trust a man long after other people gave him up, but I don't see how I can ever trust any human being again. I suffer the mortification of seeing myself attacked right and left by people at home professing patriotism and love of country who never heard the whistle of a hostile bullet. I pity them and the nation dependent on such for its existence. I am thankful, however, that, though such people make a great noise, the masses are not like them. If you see the President, tell him from me that whatever happens there will be no turning back. I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. If men make war in slavish obedience to rules, they will fail. Everyone has his superstitions. One of mine has always been, when I started to go anywhere, or to do anything, never to turn back or to stop until the thing intended was accomplished. Declare church and state forever separate and distinct, but each free within their proper spheres, and that all church property shall bear its own proportion of taxation. I know only two tunes, one of them is Yankee Doodle, and the other isn't. Nations, like individuals, are punished for their transgressions. Let us have peace. Labor disgraces no man. Unfortunately, You occasionally find men who disgrace labor. The art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is. Get at him as soon as you can. Strike him as hard as you can. And keep moving on.